Another aspect of my life as a special agent with IRS intelligence, I have a personal problem that came about as a result of my work abroad and in the United States. Working for the Internal Revenue Service, I found out myself doing more intelligence work just before I retired in 1979, and after I retired to Grand Cayman Island, the British West Indies. Briefly, it involved that on a business trip to Europe in October of 2006, I left my wife in the care of my son, Charles, my daughter-in-law, Betty, my daughter, Priscilla Starr Connolly, and her son, my grandson, Chris Connolly. My trip to Europe had two purposes. One was business for 3 weeks, and the other was to contact a clinic in the south of Germany that I had been referred to for treatment of my wife's liver disease. While I was gone, my family apparently convinced my wife, to withdraw from our family trust $124,000, which meant every cash account that we had in the bank, insurance, our Social Security, our retirement, whatever, every cash account during that period of time. I was also accused of, when I returned 3 weeks after leaving my wife in the care of my son and family, that I was then reported to be kidnapping my wife to take her back to California, where she had doctor's appointments. Subsequently, within a week, I knew it was a stress. My wife appeared to have suffered a heart attack while at my son's house. They took her had her transferred to Carson Tahoe Regional Center in Carson City, Nevada, where she died 1 week later of respiratory failure. In the process, little did they know that the insurance company made me aware of all of the medication that Doris would have been ordering during my absence, which was very unusual because she only received medication by mail every 3 months. And there, in that list of medications, was morphine tablets that were obtained and given to my wife. When I followed up on that, and I filed a lawsuit against my family for exploitation, diversion of funds, and wrongful death, that became a nightmare of a case. First of all, my son and daughter-in-law lied about the morphine. They came back a day later after being deposed and said, oh no, that they found the morphine in the closet. And in checking now, which is a lie, of course, they denied giving her the morphine, then they found the morphine, then they said they flushed it down the toilet. In checking the records at the Carson Tahoe Regional Center, the hospital had never been made aware of the fact that Doris had been given morphine. And one of the side effects of morphine is respiratory failure, and that is the cause of death of my wife. In the lawsuit that I filed, the judge, David Gamble, District Court Judge, Douglas County, Nevada, approved of the endless deposition, the request by the defendant's attorney for my passport, for my property holdings, for my income tax returns, for my California tax returns, endless records being asked for, investment accounts, etc., where I had always employed a senior audit agent of the Internal Revenue Service retired to prepare my tax return, so that was never a problem. Then they started probing into my activities abroad. And when I lived abroad, I did work for various government agencies, not only for federal government, but also for the state of New York, for the state of Florida, for the Dutch government, for the Italian government, for the French government, because I lived in Grand Cayman for 18 years. And I refused to supply information on foreign bank accounts based on the fact that there was bank secrecy in England, in Cayman, which is a colony of the UK, and that to do so would result in being punished myself, being liable, and it could possibly expose and be harmful to people who were paid money for information that they had furnished me, in effect had been working for me. The court kept this drum going from '06, and finally I convinced my attorney in early 2012, after the original lawsuit being filed in March of '07, my attorney takes it to the Supreme Court. Under the state of Nevada has no appeals court, but they have a law, 16B, I think that's referred to. It's virtually a screening process. And they appoint, obviously it's a political appointment, of some senior law firm to act as a settlement judge. On June 12th of 2012, June 4 of 2012, a settlement conference was held, at which time I just, after being threatened by my attorney what the court could do if I didn't settle with this matter, I agreed, but one of the provisions that the records be sealed, that a frivolous lawsuit that had been filed by my son would be dismissed. Lo and behold, and this is written out in longhand, like chicken scratching by this settlement judge, on the basis of that, why is it not typed up and reviewed? Because this settlement judge said, Nicholas Fry, he's also an attorney, well, the court doesn't want someone changing their mind, so that was it. Subsequently, several weeks later, the district court judge, David Gamble, intervenes and refuses to sign off on the settlement. He would not agree to the sealing of the records, which is a vital part of this settlement, because there was too much information about other people in those records. The settlement judge wanted to hold a settlement conference again, and I refused to. I said, this cannot be changed. I've got further legal advice that advised me that there was no way that that can be changed, that I could change it, and I quoted that to the settlement judge, that I would not go, and to my attorney, that I would not attend a second settlement conference in order to save the poor judgment of somebody, particularly Nicholas Fry, and my attorney, and the defendant's attorney. And the defendant's attorney had remarked in the settlement about asking, how can we protect the judge? Which concerned me. Why would the defendant's attorney be concerned about what could happen to the judge? But to keep in mind that this case was, in Nevada, had a 5-year limitation. There is a law in Nevada that if you have a lawsuit, it has to be dealt with within a 5-year period. And what the judge had done, and why I was going to the Supreme Court, he dismissed my case 4 days before we were to go to trial up against the 5-year limitation. So somewhere in there, there was collusion between that defendant's attorney and the female, who was a female, defendant's attorney was a female, and the judge. And subsequently, I requested, I sent a letter, this is now over a month, and now it's about 6 weeks ago. Today is July 5th, and this is over 6 weeks ago. I wrote a letter to the Supreme Court clerk, Supreme Court, State of Nevada, asking a simple question: what is the status of my case before the Supreme Court? Am I going to be permitted to go forward? Simply answer yes or no. Never got a response. The judicial system in the state of Nevada is in disarray. I mean, to appoint somebody that is not fully knowledgeable about the requirements of the Supreme Court, the requirement that a district court judge can intervene in the settlement that is before the Supreme Court, seems a little bit ridiculous. So it's another case that that the judicial system, where I want to be saved, is victimizing me, even after now, what it's now going into 7 years since the original lawsuit was filed. There's one added thing, a bit of information I think is important. The defendant's attorney, meaning my son and my daughter-in-law, the defendant's attorney was Nancy Ray Jackson. Miss Jackson, apparently, it appears that there might be a relationship between the judge, David R. Gamble, and that female attorney. An example would be a document was found on the floor in the courthouse in an envelope addressed to Judge Gamble. In that envelope was a list of over 50 contacts that I, Ralph Kaminsky, had made with various agencies and so forth. This document ended up being disclosed to Judge Gamble by a security agent in the Douglas County Courthouse, and that information surfaces also in a remark that the defendant's attorney makes when she makes the remark to my attorney, Ryan J. Earl, that Ralph apparently has contacted several U.S. government agencies for assistance. Raises a question: how did she find that out? Obviously by contact between the judge and her, which is a no-no. Secondly, the incident in the settlement conference when Nancy Ray Jackson presents the question to the settlement judge in the presence of my attorney: how do we protect the judge? Again, why is the defendant's attorney concerned about defending the judge? I have also written 3 letters to the Nevada Commission on Judicial Conduct. The first letter back in December of 2011, or 2010. Second letter 2011, and one letter in later part of 2012 after the settlement conference. And the letter has not been responded to, and since then I understand that Judge David R. Gamble has retired. Where's the transparency in government when I don't, well, I turned to a judicial committee, and they don't even have the courtesy of a response back. That is, again, an instance of the judicial corruption in the state of Nevada. Early in my case, my lawsuit, I contacted the FBI, and they were kind enough to listen to me with this explanation. Yes, Mr. Kaminsky, you're right. It is our jurisdiction in exploitation cases under elder law. However, we don't have the money to investigate these matters, and we turn it over to the local authorities, which unfortunately, the local authorities don't have the money either. Therefore, what I'm saying, the end result is that elderly people who are financially abused, their money has been stolen by family members. Statistically, the FBI has said that it is a national disgrace and that this occurs within the family. The elderly person now turns to who? He doesn't have the money to hire an attorney. There is no way he can recover. Where in the United States we have a juvenile court, a DUI court, a family court, a divorce court. But we don't have a court that specifically knows how to treat and expedite cases that involve elderly people. And it's a national disgrace. One of the most prominent cases that got some exposure in AARP magazine about 3 years ago, where even Mickey Rooney testified, was the case of Brooks Astor, where her son had stole $3 million from the family trust, apparently. The authorities were alerted of this by the grandson, and when Brooks Astor tried to find an attorney, she couldn't find an attorney in New York to handle the case. Understand it, they're a very wealthy family. She was not able to find an attorney until Mr. Kissinger stepped in and found her an attorney. Subsequently, the article has gotten a lot of exposure in AARP. There have been hearings held before some committee in Washington where Andy Rooney, who had been exploited, testified. And of course, where I have a personal knowledge is that of Chuck Yeager, who I understand had a similar problem with his own family, where family being unhappy with his personal life conduct apparently created financial problems for him. So it's a message that needs to be addressed in the United States, and that is the elderly, financial abuse of the elderly. Previously, I believe I mentioned that the fact that the hospital where my wife had been taken was not made aware of the fact, the doctors there were not made aware, the nurse was not made aware, that my wife had been given morphine. Therefore, they were not treating her in any way for this morphine that she'd been taken. My son comes along and says, oh, just make her comfortable, don't give her any medication. That's per the medical records. They don't know a thing about the medical care that Doris has gotten, and why I'm not present. They had gotten a restraining order against me where I could not go to the hospital, okay? And then later my son, when it appeared that Doris, my wife, might recover, and the hospital is trying to contact him and to get him to find, in fact it's in the records, they want him to find a place for my wife, and they can't contact him. In effect, he's throwing up his hands now that Doris might survive and need care. They don't know what to do, and they walk away. And of course she passes away because he had told them, don't give her any medication, just make her comfortable. Was it planned? Of course. It was a plan that that didn't happen all by accident. And I think behind the thing is a collusion between my son, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, and the other thing is that the $124,000 they took out of the trust and caused to be taken out of the trust, my attorney in the very beginning of the lawsuit asked for a summary judgment to take the money, put it into the hands of the court, and what the judge refused, denied that motion, and what my son did is that money, $124,000, was used to pay Nancy Ray Jackson, apparently, because my son had no assets like that, and so my money was used to fight me. Now, they didn't know in the beginning, when I found that I was notified of the morphine, and we got a deposition going on both of them. First, they testified, we flushed them down the toilet, okay? On the next day, apparently, they got word, hey, your dad has information. And they came forward and then a second deposition said, well, we found them in the closet, okay? And they were to bring those into court and turn them over to the court, which they did turn over the remaining number of tablets that they so-called found in the closet. With a court order from the judge, remember Judge David R. Gamble now says, when we want to go for a third deposition to cover more details about this morphine, the judge says there'll be no more deposition about the morphine and subsequently dismisses my case. That is a travesty of justice. There's one other fact regarding the Internal Revenue Service. In the Internal Revenue Service, there's also, like every agency in the U.S. government, you can make a request under Freedom of Information on a particular individual. And of course, in the case of IRS, tax returns that are not disclosed. However, there are provisions in the law that these things can see the light of day. With my experience, I filed under Freedom of Information a request for the tax returns of Judge David R. Gamble. As a result of that, I get a reply back that they could not disclose his tax returns since I didn't have a criminal investigation, or there was no criminal investigation going. They couldn't justify releasing that information. However, they did send to me the appropriate forms to submit to the judge. And these forms came to me from the United States Treasury Department, not IRS. So, following the rules of the road, I prepared a letter after the settlement conference had been held, because I didn't want to do anything that would be disruptive to that immediately after that. And I sent a very nice business-like letter to Judge David R. Gamble, requesting that he sign the attached disclosure form for the U.S. Treasury Department regarding his tax returns. He never replied to me. However, he did immediately contact Nancy Ray Jackson, the defendant attorney, and complain to her about this request by Ralph Kaminsky. In addition, then Nancy Ray Jackson, apparently after a discussion with the judge, contacted my attorney with the statement that Ralph was very deceitful by asking for information on Judge David R. Gamble. However, I also found out from the Internal Revenue Service, which they have answered back to me with instructions that if I wanted to file a legal action against Nancy Ray Jackson, as she had submitted a form to the Internal Revenue Service with a reply to go to her office. She was requesting my tax returns from the Internal Revenue Service on a form, I think it's called 4481. The form, anyone who deals with the form should know that it needed to be signed by me. And Nancy Ray Jackson apparently had hoped that this would somehow slip through the system and that she would get her hands on my tax returns. Well, I had no reason not to submit them, because in the lawsuit I submitted, at the judge's request, irrelevant to the lawsuit, my tax returns for the years 2001 through 2009, when it was the case of 2006 where my wife had been influenced to withdraw $124,000. So again, it was a case that collusion between the judge, between Nancy Ray Jackson, to somehow get back to me, because one other little fact that I have neglected to mention is that in early 1979, I made contact with Judge David R. Gamble on an informant's information that he was avoiding income tax by accepting cash payments. I went to his office on an official visit in early 1979, early 1979, and he never got back to me. I think what had happened is that he saw through my story that I was giving him, that I needed to employ him. When this was brought to the attention of my attorney, he should, and I requested that this judge be removed from my case because he obviously was prejudicial. All through this lawsuit of mine, there is evidence that that is what's behind his hate on for Ralph R. Kaminsky.